Hey guys, Jack here, and if you're wanting to improve your snapper fishing, then this video is for you. I'm a diehard snapper fisherman from the south coast of New South Wales. I've been snapper fishing here for over 20 years, and in this time I've come across a few techniques that I'd like to share. So I've recently started bringing my GoPro out on my fishing trips. I'm heading out in the morning. I'm just getting the boat ready, and I thought I'd put together a video for you guys, just going through all the techniques that I live by. I'll run through firstly the techniques I use for my bait fishing, and then I will run through the techniques that I use for my lure fishing as well. Alrighty, so first off, when it comes to the bait fishing, not a lot has changed for me over the years, techniques wise. Obviously the boats have gotten better, the sounders have gotten better, the addition of braid and things like that have improved, but the bare fundamentals, the techniques and the rigs, etc. all remain much the same. So firstly, the gear I like to use, I like to use about a 4000 size spinning reel with a light but stiff graphite rod. For example, this one here, just a little 4000 Shimano with a T-curve, 7'2". Nice and stiff. I use that for my lure fishing, and for the bait fishing it's probably my favourite rod. And then I will run 15 to 20 pound braid as my main line, and I will run 20 to 30 pound fluorocarbon leader, usually across a couple different rods, which I'll vary throughout the day to suit the different currents, the reef, you know, how the fish are acting on that particular day. If they're being very difficult, then I might drop down to one of my lighter setups. Sometimes I fish them even lighter, especially when they are being very difficult. You can definitely land the bigger fish on the light gear. You just have to be very diligent with your knot tying, and it is very crucial that you are always checking your leader as well. So after I've gotten a good fish, or I've got maybe a bit snagged, I'll always run my finger down along the leader just to make sure there's no frays or cuts, because generally that's the way that you're going to get broken off, not because the line just broke. So that's what I find. One of the most effective methods for me would have to be anchoring, obviously in the right spot, and then floating down baits as light as possible. Now, so to make sure we are fishing in the right spot, what we use is relief shading. Now let me show you what that is. Alrighty, so this is my relief shading. You can have a card for your sounder, but you can also subscribe and have relief shading on a phone or a tablet as well. I like having it hard built into the boat. This is something that hasn't been around for a huge amount of time, I don't believe, but I've found it very, very effective. What it allows you to do is see basically the ocean floor on your maps, and make sure you can really hone in on those really good reef locations. Coming from using no relief shading for a long time, it blows my mind how it really proves the spots that, you know, took years and years to find, and it really proves why those locations were catching fish for me, just by now being able to see what's actually there. But yes, I would say this is the most the best bang for buck modification you can do to your boat, above anything else for me, when it comes to snapper fishing, whether it's for lures or whether it's bait fishing. Look at them snapper arches, we're straight on them. Once you've found some reef that you're really happy with, and then you're going to fish, it's important to also search the reef to find some fish. So what you want to look for is these nice clear arches, like the ones you can see on the screen from one of my last fishing trips. So you can see those nice clear arches picking up the air bladder of those bigger fish. And if you can also find them coming up off the bottom, feeding on little bait schools, it's a good indicator as well that they are feeding. So if you've now found some really good reef, and you're confident that you've found some really good fish marks, if you can then anchor on that location, it's going to give you the highest possibility possible of catching some fish. Once I'm anchored in the right location, what I'm going to do is start cutting up my burley. Not excessive burley. I think the most important thing about burleying is keeping it nice and consistent, and I like to use small pieces. Obviously you're going to use less, but also it's not going to fill the fish up or have huge pieces floating off in the current. Just a nice little cut off piece at a time, just to get the fish to want to find out where that is coming from. What snapper will do, they'll hunt, and they'll actually want to find out where that food source is coming from, and they'll follow that up, and then hopefully follow it up to the baits that we're going to float down. So next I'll show you the rigs I like to use, and how I prepare setup. I'm going out tomorrow, so I have started setting up some of my rods. Let me give you a look, and I'll show you how we do it. Alrighty, so I do like to have a few different rods set up with a few different weight sinkers. This one will be my lightest one for tomorrow, just a 3,500 Stratic. I do have the 30-pound leader. I'm fishing some fairly aggressive reef tomorrow, but it is quite deep as well. So that will be the lightest sinker I'll start with at that depth. There's a good chance the current's going to be too strong and I'll have to move my way up. I like to be as light as I can. The baits present a lot better if they're just making it down nice and slowly, nice and naturally coming down to the bottom. And then what the snapper will do, they'll hit that on the way down, sometimes up higher, mid-water, and all the way down closer to the bottom. But that natural look is what I like to go for. So the lighter the sinker that you can run, the better. But you do still need to be able to get it down close to the bottom. I've got the young fella's little rod there rigged up with a bit bigger one just to make it a bit easier for him. And then this other rod here, I do have a bigger bottom basher rigged up on this one, just a nice simple one. And I'd say there's a good chance I'm going to need to use that tomorrow because the current has been quite strong, and I may end up having to up my sinker sizes as well. But that's where I start, and if I need to, I'll just nip it off and go a little bit heavier as the day goes on. Fishing in closer, shallower waters, I like to go all the way down to no sinker at all, especially if you're in 15 meters or so, if you can, or certainly smaller ball sinkers than that. Anyway, that rig obviously has been around for a long time. It's a very common one, but just using it effectively and adjusting your weight so the bait falls perfectly is what I find makes the difference with that. Alrighty, so next up, I'll talk a bit about the baits that I like to use. So the most important thing when it comes to bait is that it is fresh bait. So ideally you want to be catching your bait the night before you go fishing or the morning of fishing. Fresh bait makes the difference. My favourite baits would have to be fish heads, so yakka, slimy mackerel heads, and I find whiting heads are really good as well. I believe I would have caught more big snapper on fish heads than any other bait, so I'm going to call that my number one favourite bait. Next after that would have to be squid tubes, so fresh caught squid tubes cut into nice long strips. I find that very effective. And then also live baiting, so small slimy mackerel would probably have to be my favourite when it comes to live baiting. I find that very effective on those days when the fish are biting, they're really schooling up, you're catching one after the other. I'll use the live baits on those occasions to really separate those bigger fish and hook those bigger fish by sending that down those big live baits or even the big fish heads, and I've caught a lot of big snapper that way. That's the go. Back seal them. All right, so one more thing just in regard to your baits and baiting them up. I find the most effective way to hook them through the nose or the top of the bait just one time, and that's going to give them a very natural look. Same goes for if you are using squid strips or anything like that. Just one time through the top of the bait and then let the rest of the bait fall down nice and naturally through the water column there. And if you're concerned about baits coming off or you're concerned about the fish missing the hook, don't be. I find that just in the top of the bait works very well. Obviously, every now and then you're not going to be lucky, but I think it's much more important to have the bait presented naturally, and the snapper do tend to go for the head as well. So by having it pinned in the top of the nose there, you're going to give yourself really good odds when they really suck that water and that bait down into them as well. So yeah, that will be my advice when it comes to baiting up. So next off, I'll talk a bit about my lure fishing for snapper. So you'll see here I am sitting in a 435 Hornet Trophy. The reason I have a boat like this is because I absolutely love catching snapper on soft plastics, especially in shallower water. So I'll take you through a bit of the techniques that I use for snapper on plastics as well. A lot of the principles that apply for the bait fishing side of things apply also for the lure fishing side of things. For example, getting your weights right with your jig head rather than your sinker, just to make sure that bait is going to fall nice and slowly through the water column to suit your currents and the depth that you're fishing in. So just to show you a couple, the jerk shad 5-inch would definitely have to be my favourite. I do like the Z-Man. The reason I like the Z-Man is simply just because you're not changing them all the time because they're strong and the fish don't break them. Some of those other ones that tend to break a lot easier, you find yourself changing lures frequently. So that's why I like the Z-Man. But definitely the pink and white in the 5-inch jerk shad has to be my number one go-to. I find myself reaching for it time and time again. A lot of people like to try a lot of different lures. I do from time to time, but I have to say I'm most commonly reaching for that lure. I do also like the little curly tail as well. I have found pink and whites very effective for me. My other favourite would have to be the motor oil colour. I found that really good as well, and I often just use that in the jerk shad as well. It's got to be my favourite. What I think is very important is getting that perfect weight when it comes to the jig head for the depth that you're fishing in. So a few different weights that I use here depending. Obviously this thing is just for fishing in really deep water, and it still lets the lure bounce around naturally. This sort of size, I like the 1/8 is a nice size in those shallower waters, but sometimes you do need to go a little bit heavier or a little bit lighter if you can as well. And then with the actual fishing methods, what I like to do is look at my reef that I'm going to fish, work out what way my boat's going to be drifting. Obviously I have the Minn Kota as well, so I can have a little bit of control over that, but it is much easier to just let the boat drift naturally. And what I'll do, I'll plan my drift over the reef. I'll sneak in with the Minn Kota, and then I'll allow the boat to drift naturally over the reef, and I'll cast as far as possible ahead of the drift and let that bait, that lure, float down in the water column nice and natural as I approach the lure with the current. That allows the bait to fall down closer to the bottom. And what I usually find with snapper is they will hit the lure on those first few drops. I find it more uncommon that they hit it halfway through on the retrieve or anything like that. Once I sort of start to get closer to the boat, I tend to just wind it in, and it's usually, especially the bigger fish, I find those really big long casts, just as they're even on their first fall, they'll pick it up and they'll just scream. The difference with catching them on soft plastics in the shallows is they are a lot harder to land. They tend to go straight for the reef, and you don't have that luxury of the bait fishing in deeper water where you can sort of pull them up and out. So you really do have to lock your drag and be really, really diligent with your leader, with your line. Make sure it is heavy enough. I do still use similar weighted lines as far as my bait and my lure fishing goes. But yeah, you do tend to lose a lot more of the big fish in the shallows, and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, lock that drag up and try and keep it out of the reef as best as you can. And yeah, sometimes, you know, there's just nothing you can do, but that's all part of the fun of catching them on soft plastics in the shallows. It is a hell of a lot of fun. So just to touch a bit more on how heavy a gear I like to use when fishing for soft plastics. So these would be my two favourites that I'll generally set up for soft plastics. That's a 3,500 Stratic and a 4,000 Spheros. So basically they're both on around 7 foot graphite rods. They are quite stiff, which makes it easier for casting long distance with those lighter weight lures. And my line sizes on those are, on the 4,000 I've got 20 pound braid, and then I've got 16 pound on the Stratic. You know, you probably could beef it up a little bit more. You know, I do tend to lose a couple, you know, bigger fish from time to time in the shallows, you know, which often can't be helped. But fishing lighter, definitely same as the bait. You know, you fish a bit lighter, you catch a bit more fish, and you tend to be able to cast a bit further as well. I did often used to use 20-25 pound leader, good quality fluorocarbon I would recommend. But I have, you know, just from losing good fish, you know, I have, you know, over the last couple of years sort of bumped that up to that 30 pound, you know, because I am really chasing that bigger fish. So, and then in regards to the jig heads, just to touch on that again, you know, I'll generally start at about a 3/0 hook. I mean, I love to use the 1/8, but you often do need to go a bit heavier, like your quarter or so. But yeah, just depending on the conditions, you just really want to get that bait to fall nice and slowly down the water column and definitely not be too heavy. Next one would be when to fish when you're not working. No, so when it comes to picking your, you know, best days and times and everything like that, obviously your key areas are going to always be early morning, late afternoon. That's when you're going to have the most amount of fish biting. There are a lot of other factors and a lot of other things that you can try and line up as well. I find a no moon can be effective as well, especially early in the morning. Reason being, at night time, if you have a no moon, it's very dark and the fish won't feed as actively. So when that light starts to hit in the morning, that can spike a bit of a feed-in frenzy for the snapper, I find. Other things, you know, things like the tide changes will have some effect on their bite times as well. And, you know, if you can line these things up, like your tide changes with your dusk dawn, I would say one of the most effective times that I've found for snapper would have to be looking at the barometer can be handy. You know, people say a high barometer, your 10-20 sort of barometer can be very effective, but even better, what I find is when you've got really bad weather ending or really bad weather coming, big swells and things like that, that's when your barometers are going to spike really quickly or drop. And I believe the fish can sort of sense that happening, and what they'll do is, before that really bad weather comes, they will sort of go into a bit of a feeding frenzy leading up to that time, so just before a big swell or a big weather pattern. Also after that, so you know, you've had big seas, the ocean's been all chopped up, all the food's all chopped up, and then you have that barometer start to rise back up pretty quickly. That can be another good time for your snapper bites as well. I would say that those times seem to be more effective for me than a lot of the others. So, you know, obviously you go when you can go, but if you can line up as many of these sorts of things as possible, then that's going to give you a higher chance of catching the fish and getting those good bites.
Oh, oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Oh, that's very good. Yes. Here we go. Here we go.
All right, Alrighty guys, so last of all I'll show you a bit around my boat, which is a 435 Hornet Trophy, which I absolutely love. I've got it really well set up for bait and lure fishing, and yeah, let me give you a look around it. Alrighty, so I'll start at the back. Now this boat would have to be probably about my 15th boat I've owned. This one is definitely my favorite, and I have had it for probably more than 5 years now, and with no plans of changing it. I've got a 40 horsepower 4-stroke Yamaha on the back, which I love, very efficient. I've got the snapper racks all around the back, which I would not be without when it comes to my bait snapper fishing. Being able to have the rods out on that horizon angle really allows the fish to hook themselves when they're taking those floating baits down, you know, allowing me to have, say, 2 rods out at a time. It does have the factory live bait tank in here. I do have 2 live bait tanks. I didn't do that because I needed 2 live bait tanks. I did it because I removed this one from my Haynes. So I just re-plumbed it into this boat. So, you know, it works good if, you know, one's not working properly or you've got heaps of live baits. You can put some in each to keep them alive a bit longer, that sort of thing. But yeah, this one obviously has the chopping board, the rod holders on the top, and then I've got rod holders on each side as well, just for trawl and having them out on an angle. I do have heaps of rod holders, so I've got straight up and downs up the side and on this side as well. And then I've got this little setup here. I just basically used an old rocket launcher and cut that up and made a bit of a console in there from scratch, nice and solid, holds the rods when I'm traveling. And then yes, this is my console. The top section here has been customized just to hold the bigger windscreen, give you something better to hang on to up top, which I really like when I'm fishing for snapper, and that outside gives me that protection from the sea spray coming over. Yeah, I've got the GoPro mount up there now. I've got the quad lock for the phone. I've got the Helix 8, which I find works really, really well. The only reason I did go the Humminbird though was because it links to my Terrova, my Minn Kota Terrova, so they link together, and I can you know, mark fish and whatnot on the sounder and spot lock on those fish because they are linked together. And then yes, I've got the obviously GME radio. That's all my switches for all my electronics. Underneath there is like an EPIRB and fire extinguisher and a bit of safety gear. I have the nets and lights and such hooked up here. I did buy a gaff the other day, so I'll probably set something up to hook that up as well. Yeah, a few more rod holders up front for the passengers. I did just wire up this light today as well. There is all deck lights all the way around, but that one is just now set up for whoever's up the front, so they have their own light when getting ready early in the morning. That one there, that Minn Kota, is a Terrova Link 56 pound. Yeah, I did have a few little issues with the link with this one, but other than that, you know, they're a really good motor, and I wouldn't be without one now. Just here, I do have my different scents that I like to use for my soft plastic fishing. I didn't mention that when I went through the soft plastic side of things, so yeah, I do like to keep my lures scented as often as possible. And there are a couple of the ones that I've got in here at the moment. I do have the big pedestal, which is good. It gives you something to lean on when there's a bit of swell and you're casting lures. Yeah, good in the river to give you something to sit on as well. So I've got the factory consoles here. This one just holds my life jackets. All my fishing gears in here. I've got separate tackle boxes for my river, for my soft plastic, for the snapper fishing and everything as well. Battery rigged up solely for Minn Kota up the front. Got some jumper leads and med kits and things like that up there. This middle hatch just has all the safety equipment. And then yeah, you've just got an anchor well that has all that reef anchor and rope up the front there. But yeah, she's a pretty good setup, and I love it to bits.